is St. Paul a little bit more Protestant in the way he puts together the Christian message? Just you keep thinking about these questions that I put out that come to us from our Christian story. There's a wonderful Catholic writer called Gary Wills who a couple of years ago wrote a bestseller in America called What Paul Meant. The great Andrew Greeley said of this little book, it's a little book, easy to buy and easy to read. Sociologically, this is the best description of how the Christian Jewish movement emerged. Wow. And the Los Angeles Times said, Gary Wills is simultaneously one of the country's leading public intellectuals and American Catholicism's most formidable lay scholar. Read What Paul Meant to get a sense of what the preacher from Tarsus really intended. It's a great little book. Gary Wills, in his book, says a number of things which are, I find, fascinating for trying to get something of the importance of St. Paul. His letters stand closer to Jesus than do any other words in the New Testament in time. Paul is a testimony to the vital explosion of belief in Jesus all across the Jewish diaspora. Thirdly, another one, of all those who saw the risen Lord, Paul is the only one whose words to describe this experience we possess. Okay. Second thing I'd like to do is a little bit on Paul's letters and how St. Paul features in the Acts of the Apostles, written by Luke, of course. Everybody agrees that Paul wrote the following 7 letters. 1 Thessalonians, Galatians, Philippians, the 1 Corinthians, the 2 Corinthians, Romans, and the letter to Philemon. Now most other scholars, most New Testament scholars rather, think that Paul didn't write, but a disciple of his did, the second letter to the Thessalonians, Colossians, and Ephesians. They're very close to Paul. They're sometimes called the Deutero-Pauline letters. And then finally, the pastoral letters, 1st and 2nd Timothy and the letter to Titus, come later, according to most scholars, and have quite a different thought pattern behind them than Paul's letters. But there are some scripture scholars that think that Paul did write the 13 letters that are attributed to him. And Father Michael Fallon would be one of those. And Cardinal Carlo Martini, the former Archbishop of Milan, would be another. In his very beautiful little book, The Gospel According to St. Paul, Meditations on His Life and Letters, which came out just 2 years ago, he writes this: It isn't of interest for us to determine whether these writings are from his own hand or if they report his exact words. We accept them all, these letters, as the Church has transmitted them to us, as an expression of the character of the Apostle, the way that the early Church knew him and conveyed him to us. Now, a little bit about what do we learn about St. Paul from the letters and from the Acts of the Apostles, etc. This is an important issue. Our knowledge of who Paul is comes from his letters, which were collected after his martyrdom. And of course, we know a little bit about St. Paul too from the Acts of the Apostles, because Paul is St. Luke's great hero. But a big question for us and for many scholars is, how accurate is St. Luke? He seems to idealize a lot who St. Paul was. Now, the early church was unanimous in identifying Luke as the author of the Acts of the Apostles and as a very close companion of St. Paul. St. Clement of Alexandria, around the year 200 AD, had this to say: Luke was a Syrian of Antioch, by profession a physician, the disciple of the apostles, and later a follower of St. Paul, until Paul's martyrdom. Luke himself says, in the opening verses of Luke Acts, that he has a keen interest in the historical facts, in investigating everything carefully, and a key interest in eyewitnesses. We understand that he had to edit the material, of course, and put them into some sort of order, a narrative which made sense and had a sense of development. So he did have some sort of an effect on all this material. A major part of the Acts of the Apostles itself, in fact, a fifth of it, 22% of it, is speeches. They're speeches, half of which are given by St. Paul. So Luke, we know, would obviously have composed these speeches. But as Paul's close companion, he would have talked to him about what he'd said on each of these occasions and what he was trying to get across. So he would have known the mind of St. Paul, but put it across perhaps in his own style. That's precisely why somebody like Michael Fallon or Cardinal Martini tend to trust what Luke tells us about St. Paul in the Acts of the Apostles. But we've got to face the truth that a lot of other scholars think that Luke was more interested in his own theology, his own slant to the whole development of Christianity. And they're a little suspicious of what Luke has to say about St. Paul. A few, such as that popular Gary Wills, for example, goes so far in his account of Paul to exclude any knowledge we have of Paul from the Acts of the Apostles as unreliable. So, let's take a look now a little bit at what we learn about St. Paul from the Acts of the Apostles. Okay? With that caveat in mind. From the Acts, we learn that Paul came from Tarsus in Cilicia. That was a Greek-speaking city in the Jewish diaspora, which, according to the pagan Strabo, was renowned for its schools of rhetoric and philosophy. In fact, I like this. Tarsians have a facility whereby anyone could instantly speak off the cuff and unceasingly on any subject whatsoever. We also learn from the Acts of the Apostles that as a young man, Paul came to Jerusalem for his theological formation, and he was a disciple of the great Gamaliel, and eventually became a Pharisee. Well, most scholars tend to agree that Paul was born in Tarsus and studied in Jerusalem, but not everybody. In the Acts of the Apostles, St. Paul has 3 missionary journeys. But, of course, that's not how St. Paul would have understood what he's doing. Now it's time to go on journey number 2. Of course not. That's a schematization of St. Luke over Paul's apostolic life. And most scholars would agree with that. It's too schematized in St. Luke, in the Acts. Another difference a significant one.